Welcome to Voices of Valor. You not just watching history, you stepping into the footsteps of the men who lived it. Real soldiers, real letters, real courage that changed lives. Sometimes in the most unexpected places. If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and join our community. Because here, every veteran's voice matters, and none of them will be forgotten. In the damp spring of 1968, Private First Class Danny Callahan sat on a sandbag-lined foxhole near Khe Sanh, South Vietnam rain soaking through his fatigues as he stared at a crumpled sheet of paper in his trembling hands. The 21-year-old from Dubuque, Iowa, had written the same letter 3 nights in a row, each version more honest, more raw than the last. It was meant for his younger brother, Thomas, back home on their family's corn farm along the Mississippi River, but Danny couldn't bring himself to seal the envelope. Not after what happened at Lang Ve. Not after watching his best friend, Corporal Marcus Reed from East St. Louis, bleed out in his arms while whispering, "Tell my mom I wasn't scared." Danny had promised, but never sent the letter. Now, guilt coiled in his chest like barbed wire. He wrote again, "Tommy, if you're reading this, I didn't make it. And if I did, I'm not the brother you remember. War doesn't just take lives, it steals pieces of your soul. I'm sorry I yelled at you before I left. I'm sorry I broke Mom's favorite lamp. I'm sorry I never told you how proud I am of you for staying strong." Outside the perimeter, distant mortar fire echoed like thunder. Danny folded the paper carefully, tucked it into his breast pocket right over his heart, and whispered, "Maybe tomorrow I'll send it," but tomorrow never came. On March 12, 1968, during a sudden NVA assault, Danny was hit by shrapnel while dragging a wounded radio man to safety. He survived, but the letter stayed hidden, forgotten, nestled among dog tags and photos of home, as he was evacuated to Japan and eventually discharged. Back in Dubuque, Danny returned a quiet ghost. He avoided the VFW hall, ignored letters from Marcus's mother, and slept with the lights on. The letter, still unread, still unsent, buried in a duffel bag under his bed. Years passed, seasons turned, corn grew, and was harvested. Danny worked the fields in silence, married a kind nurse named Evelyn, had 2 daughters, and never spoke of Vietnam. But every April, on the anniversary of Lang Ve, he'd take out the duffel bag, hold the yellowed paper, and put it back, too ashamed to face the truth, too afraid to let go. It wasn't until 1995, 27 years after the war, that fate intervened. Danny's eldest daughter, Claire, now a history teacher at Dubuque Senior High, was cleaning out the attic when she found the old military bag tucked behind boxes of Christmas ornaments. Curious, she unzipped it and discovered medals, a rusted Zippo, and a brittle envelope addressed in shaky handwriting to Thomas Callahan. Inside was the unsent letter. That night, she read it aloud to her father over coffee at the kitchen table. Danny's hand shook so badly he spilled his mug. Tears streamed down his weathered face, silent, heavy tears he'd held back for decades. "I was gonna send it," he whispered, "but I thought, if I came back broken, Tommy wouldn't understand. And if I died, he'd only remember me sad." Claire placed her hand over his. "He's gone, Dad, but he deserved to know you loved him. Thomas had died in 1983 car accident on Highway 61, never knowing his brother carried that guilt." The next morning, Danny did something he hadn't done since 1968. He walked into the Dubuque Public Library and asked for help. With Claire's encouragement, he began researching Marcus Reed's family. Records showed Marcus's mother, Eleanor Reed, had passed in 1990, but she'd left behind a granddaughter, Maya Reed, living in St. Louis. Danny wrote a new letter this time. He sealed it, "Dear Maya, I knew your grandfather. He was brave, kind, and the best friend I ever had. He asked me to tell your grandmother he wasn't scared. I failed her, but maybe I can honor him through you." He included a photo of Marcus smiling under a palm tree, a shot Danny had taken days before Lang Ve. Weeks later, a reply arrived. Maya, a social worker and single mother of 2, wrote back, "Grandma never stopped talking about Marcus. She kept his purple heart on her dresser. Thank you for remembering him. Would you come to St. Louis? I'd like to meet the man who held his hand at the end." Danny stared at the letter, heart pounding. For the first time in years, the weight didn't feel like shame, it felt like purpose. In October 1995, Danny boarded a Greyhound bus in Dubuque, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, the unsent letter and Marcus's photo tucked safely inside. St. Louis greeted him with crisp autumn air and the distant hum of the Mississippi. Maya met him at the bus station, a woman in her 30s with Marcus's same warm brown eyes and easy smile. They drove to her home in the Shaw neighborhood, where her children, Jamal and Kira, played in the yard. Over sweet tea and peach cobbler, Danny told the full story. The ambush, Marcus's last words, the years of silence. Maya listened without judgment. "He saved 3 men that day," she said softly, "including you. That's his legacy." The next morning, they visited Bellefontaine Cemetery, where Marcus was buried. Danny placed a single white rose on the headstone and finally read aloud the message he'd carried for 27 years. "Marcus, you weren't scared. And I'll never forget you." That evening, Maya invited Danny to a community gathering at her church, where veterans and families shared stories under string lights in the courtyard. Hesitant at first, Danny sat silently until an elderly Korean War veteran asked, "You served in Nam?" Danny nodded. "Me too," the man said. "We don't talk enough." One by one, others joined. A Gulf War nurse, a Desert Storm mechanic, a young Afghanistan veteran struggling with PTSD. Danny found himself speaking not as a hero, but as a man who'd been lost and was finally finding his way back. He stayed in St. Louis a week longer than planned. He helped Jamal fix his bike, read bedtime stories to Kira, and walked the riverfront with Maya, talking about forgiveness, family, and the quiet courage it takes to heal. On his last night, Maya handed him a small wooden box. Inside was Marcus's restored Purple Heart along with a new letter, in her handwriting, "Keep his memory alive. And keep writing your own story." Danny returned to Dubuque, not as the haunted man who left, but as someone willing to be seen. He joined the local VFW not to drink, but to listen. He started a veterans writing group at the library, where former soldiers penned letters they'd never sent, poems about home, and stories of brotherhood. Claire helped him digitize Marcus's photo and share it with the National Vietnam War Museum. In 1997, Danny and Maya co-founded Letters Home Project, a nonprofit that helps veterans record their stories and connect with families of fallen comrades. They hosted annual events in St. Louis and Dubuque, where old soldiers sat with school children, sharing truth without glory. Danny never became famous, but in the eyes of those he touched, he was more than a soldier, he was a bridge. Years later, at age 72, Danny stood before a crowd at the Dubuque Veterans Memorial, unveiling a new plaque honoring Marcus Reed and all Iowans lost in Vietnam. His voice, once quiet, now carried strength. "War takes much," he said, "but it doesn't have to take our humanity. Sometimes, the bravest thing a soldier can do is to finally send the letter." That night, he sat on his porch overlooking the Mississippi, the original unsent letter now framed beside Marcus's Purple Heart. He opened his journal and wrote one last note, not to Thomas, but to himself. "You are enough. You were always enough." And for the first time since Khe Sanh, Daniel Callahan slept through the night. No lights, no nightmares, just the soft whisper of river wind and the quiet peace of a soul finally at rest. His story didn't end with war. It began again with truth, with connection, and with a letter that, though never mailed, finally reached the heart it was meant to heal.